let's invite the rest of the panel up. I would like Justine, Matthijs, and Julie to come and join us. There you are. Yes, we have one mic here and one there, I think. Hello? Yes, yeah. Here we are, if you can share it. Can we fit three on the sofa? I'm realizing now this is exciting. So Julie Bergeron is the head of industry programs at the Marché du Film at Cannes, including the management then of the Producers Network, the Producers Workshop, the Doc Corner, and the Next Pavilion. Many people in the audience are going, ooh, everything that's fun. She's also manager international projects at Ventana Sur, the Latin American film market that the Marché is co-organizing in Buenos Aires. Justine Powell is Senior Vice President at Iroko Global, the content distribution arm of Iroko, which is the largest distributor of African content worldwide. She oversees the content acquisition and spearheads the company's multi-channel distribution across pay TV, internet TV, in-flight entertainment, and YouTube MCNs, among other things. And we have Matthijs Boter-Knoll, who is Director of the European Film Market. His background is in documentary film production, and he came to the EFM via leadership and development positions at the IDFA Academy and the Berlinale Talents Program, which is a very practical way of building the future. Welcome very much. Now, first, we're going to talk about what you all do in a little while, but I'd just like to ask if any of you have any immediate reactions to what Anna has been speaking about today. No? Yes? No?
Stunned silence.
Stunned silence.
I like pictures.
Okay, no? Very good. Yes, okay, Julie.
No, well, yes, I think it's really what strikes me is, for example, in 2007 at Cannes for the 60th anniversary, we organized an opening conference of the Marché, and the title was "Audiences of Tomorrow." That was almost 10 years ago. And at the time, the reaction of the film industry was very strongly negative about this conference because we had people like Dana Boyd, for example, who was an ethnographer expert in the US for Google, YouTube, which were not as big as today. And so she was really into how to get to the audience. And I will always remember one sales agent who was at the conference who at one point said to her, you know me, I'm working for 300 buyers in the world and I'm happy. I'm selling my films to these 300 distributors and I'm happy with that. And I think today it's a totally different world and it's not so long ago. So it's...
That's good news. Yes.
I'd like two things, particularly, Anna, what you said. Hi.
Hi.
Which was actually one thing, I think demands of audiences and approaching audiences can't be replied to with answers from the industry or that industry-driven. I think that's a very important thing to realize. I'm sure that many people do try to listen to audiences and give answers that will satisfy audiences, but I think too often still people think that yes, but we have this and we have this and we can't just change that, which is all very nice and all very legitimate, but in the end it will turn, I think it will create a cats and dogs living together situation, which might be quite complicated, as we all know. Another thing that I really related to is sharing more, engaging more together, and also being open about failures that maybe sometimes are made when we do experiment, which I think is happening not enough. For obvious reasons. I mean, nobody wants to share a failure. I mean, it's always nicer to sort of like spread the word about something that goes really well. But I think what you said about each of us working in his or her own silo and sort of like communicating the things from our own silo that are going very well will not bring us very much further in the next years. So it's not only about like, let's hold hands and all work together. I think it's really necessary to stop thinking in these kind of silos. And that doesn't only refer, I think, in my opinion, to producers or sales agents or distributors. It even does relate to festivals, I think, in some way, where I think we should see where we can join forces sometimes because it will benefit the industry.
So our panel headline today is Creating the Future, and specifically, I think, as something that the industry should be doing together. And on that note, I would like each of the newcomers to describe something that you do in your work that either reflects optimism or creates a good future for the industry. Who would like to begin this team?
I can start on that. I mean,
yes.
It's interesting working at Iroko. So Iroko Global is all about distribution. And for us, we're trying to future-proof in that we have recently launched an app just for Android for Africa. So what we saw was, yes, streaming is very popular across most of the world, but in Africa, you cannot stream. The infrastructure isn't there. So what we've done now, we've got a download app for Android phones. So that is our distribution mechanism for Africa. And so in lots of ways, we're trying to look into the future about where things are going to go. For the rest of the world, so outside of Africa, our distribution is away from sort of the Android app, and what we're looking to do is to actually work for or with platforms that are out there already.
Sorry, can you just microphone a little closer? Thank you.
So, for example, I will work with any new platform that is, launching, or even, free TV platforms or mobile phone operators, anyone that's actually interested in taking our content. So we're trying to sort of future-proof by really taking two different routes into the market.
Mm-hmm. Could you just tell us very, very briefly what Iroko is? Because I realize not everybody might know.
Yeah, sure. So Iroko, we are a startup. We're 5 years old. We are the biggest distributor of Nollywood content in the world. So we've got about 3,000 titles. Nollywood is the second largest film industry in the world in terms of volume. And we produce films and TV series. So very young company. We have been compared to Netflix in lots of ways. We're obviously very flattered by that, but very, very new in the market still.
We said that in the report that there will be some global players whose names are not very well known yet. Do you think Iroko will be on that list?
I think we will. I mean, Nollywood as a, sort of a genre is niche, but my view in terms of content is that we are going more niche, and that's what audiences are looking for. So I think that we've got a strong niche content. And I think we're very clear about, we know what our audience wants as well. So what we've got also is Rock Studios. It's our own production arm. So we produced about 100 hours of content a year at the moment. So that's TV series and films. And we're looking to double that for this year, so 2016. So, we get a lot of data from the website and from the app in terms of, the actors and actresses that people really like, the type of content, and we use those data points to then feed into Rock Studios to then produce more content around those genres.
Julie, I think your work is better known, but would you just like to lift out some of the things that are future-oriented, that are your favorites?
So in Cannes we have since 2 years, it's going to be the 3rd edition, the next pavilion, which is this year extending to become also a program, because we are going to have next to the pavilion a conference room theater that will be with 85 seats, where we can program or showcase every day over the time of the market new experiences, workshops. We're going to have workshops, roundtables about where cinema is going. So we're always on the cinema experience. For us, it's really important. We believe, like you said, that the theaters will always be there in different, maybe in different ways, but that's something we're defending. So we want to have in this next theater all kinds of experience of the cinema of tomorrow, like virtual reality, immersive interactive films. So we're going to build up with you, I hope, this showcase of what's going on now in the world.
Very good. Matthias?
Well, we're the first film market in the year, starting next week for everybody who
after the Nordic film market, for sure.
But that's true. Yeah. I apologize. We're the second film market in the year. That means that we have been looking in the past months, obviously, what we'd like to do when it comes to new initiatives. We've introduced a couple of new things last year at the market, including a platform for drama series. that I presented earlier today. I don't see that necessarily as, I mean, I think it's reacting to how the industry is evolving, because we aim that platform specifically at people working in the film industry that are also working in drama series production, financing, funding. So there's the overlap with high quality content that we're looking for. We also introduced last year a new platform which basically tries to actively link the startup industry that's very present in Berlin these days. Berlin has actually surpassed London this year as the city with the most startups, and that's not that difficult because there's many people doing that, but also as a city where most is invested in startups at the moment in Europe. And we felt in the team of the European film market a few years ago, we said, well, actually we're in a city, we're the only festival taking place in a huge city with a big market attached to it at the same time, with loads of creative ideas lying on the streets everywhere, and we're actually not doing anything with it that much. So we decided to change that. So we invite people from the city, but in the meantime this year also from the rest of Europe, including from Finland, for example, and Norway. We have two very interesting startups this year who actually introduced their ideas, their apps, their products that we think could really benefit the industry.
So startups, tech startups, for instance, technology startups, and you bring them...
Yeah, but we have several ones. We have some of them who help make it easier for cinema owners to basically reach audiences and make it easier for people to book tickets. We have a company that makes it much easier for people with hearing or sight, how do you say that correctly in English? Anna, help me, please.
Impaired.
Hearing impaired, thank
yeah.
you. To be able to go to the cinema with family, with friends, and basically hear or see either dialogues or see them on their phones. I mean, these kind of technologies do exist already for a longer time. Now they've been adapted in such a way that it could be quite easily applied also for film screenings. There's a couple of other things. Also, for example, search engines, how to find a film that I saw ages ago when I don't remember. It was Ghostbusters, but I still remember some of the things happening. You can basically fill in what you think or how you would describe a film instead of knowing the words that people tag films with, so you can find them. So you can just say, well, actually this film, I think it was from the 80s with... I don't know who in it and so on, and it will basically give you all films listed to that, and it's working really well. It's a Finnish startup, Valossa. So we present that. It's just a few examples, and we think that's for us quite an important project, not because of these 10 startups, it's a small thing. For us it stands for something that, apart as the European film market, as a market where sales can be done, where people can buy content, where people can set up co-productions and so on, I think European film market will develop pretty quickly into a platform where we want to be an active part of actually giving impulses, but also bringing people together, not only with people from the film industry only to find solutions for challenges that we're all facing, but to actively bring people from outside the film industry into those kind of events. I know that's done. There's many panels, there's many labs where that is done. But we want to make it a more active thing that is focusing on maybe experimenting on a few prototypes that we'd like to try out. Be very open about what works and what doesn't work, and then every year to take next steps in that.
So less panels and more prototypes, so to speak. So what is a prototype in the context of this? Is it a distribution model, or?
For example, yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now, you've all had the opportunity to look at this year's Nostradamus report. So, of course, I should ask if there's anything in particular that has struck you, that you very much agree with or very much disagree with, because the audience would like to know.
For me, what struck me is the section 2, which was on the rapid changes in representation. So again, it goes back to what Iroka is all about, which is, it's about niche content, niche audiences. And I think that's very true. People are looking to see representation of themselves on screen. So particularly with Nollywood content, we tell African stories for Africans, whether they're in Africa or the diaspora. It's stories, the universal stories of falling in love, but there's other stories that are much more, focused on what an audience wants, which is, the role of religion, the role of family, and so on. So I thought that section was really resonated with me and what we do at Iroka.
Anything else? Julie? Anna?
Well, yeah, I like the positive approach you're taking, and I will agree with you that the niche market, I think, is the good surprise of the possibilities and opportunities it can give to producers' catalog, and it's like if the globalization for me is making even stronger the urge of the audience for niche and cultural diversity in a way. The more it goes global, the more people, I think, will need to have their own stories in their own languages as well on the platforms, and that's in the report. And for me, it's a good news. We should see it positively, I think.
And this is because it's about everything. I always find myself struggling with this when we're doing the work, because of course mainstream somewhere is niche everywhere else. Nollywood is very mainstream.
It is indeed. I mean, Nollywood is massive across Africa, absolutely. But I think the way I read the report was very much taking, seeing a perspective from, I suppose, Europeans more generally. So we're talking about niche content outside of Africa, and I think there certainly is an audience across, we've noticed across the US, UK, there's a huge appetite for Nollywood content. And
I mean, certainly Nordic noir is the same thing. It's very mainstream here, but it is like this niche interests in other countries. And then it becomes this very specific quality thing. Anna?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think, particularly I agree that it shows us more and more that we're living in a parallel age of convergence and fragmentation, and we tend to think from our own industry perspective of everything's coming together and then it splits and then it comes back. And I think particularly at the big film markets, you see those happen in the sum ups and the way that Variety or Screen might report on what's happened from an industry perspective. So it's really fascinating to be able to track both of those trails and to think about it in a more holistic way, because I think they tell us things that communicate between both. For me, the section that kind of really excited me, but that I probably disagreed with the most, was the VR section. I think it's a really fascinating time. I don't agree that it doesn't suit linear storytelling. I think also the rapidity of development in that area is amazing. It challenges my own statement about Malcolm Gladwell's warning that things take a long time to bed themselves in. Having done 2 years ago at Sheffield Docfest a VR experience that I had to hold the table because I felt seasick, and it was really not a fun experience, to being shown by Chris Milk at Sundance with one of his Oculus, a documentary about the Ebola epidemic, and having to go and basically lie down in a dark room for 2 hours because I was so emotionally moved. There's something, I think, in there, and with the backing of Megan Ellison, I think Chris and Aaron Coblin are going to do some extraordinary things at Verse Studios in particular. I think you'll see them blazing a trail towards what is narrative in that world.
I do agree with Anna. I thought I could be the only one to talk about virtual reality, but I was also, the representation part really moved me as well, because I felt it's really something very essential, even though, I mean, you referred to Todd Haynes saying some things that are very simple and the most true. I think with representation, that is the fact. It's out there, it's super obvious, and still you see that the industry is not really not that much catered for that yet, and it should change, and it is changing. It has to change, and it will be forced to change, I think. They meaning including us. The other thing that did interest me as well was virtual reality for another reason. I think we've of course been looking as well at the European film market. How are we going to represent that topic? It's going to be in various places. It's going to be in the Meet the Docs program. It's going to be in the co-production market. It's going to be part of the startup initiative that we have, because some of the startups that we selected are VR production companies, creating quite some interesting and very exciting content that they show as well. And we introduce also a VR pop-up cinema at the EFM, so people can actually watch half an hour of different kinds of VR material. We did not arrange for any dark rooms for people to lie down afterwards, because they're so moved, but it's actually good to know, Anna, that might happen. So we need to work on that. I think the whole VR discussion, it's very interesting. The last word hasn't been said about it. And what struck me also with the people quoted in the Nostradamus report is basically that with this, I mean, it makes me think immediately, Julie and I were talking about it before, it makes me think about people talking about transmedia, people talking about cross-media. For everybody of us who goes to Power to the Pixel in London, for example, where great things are being done every year, But you also see that the focus of events like that has been shifting for a number of years. Some people really pursue a career and they build up some interesting things, but quite a small group of people. And now with virtual reality, the discussion all of a sudden is focused on virtual reality. Many people are very skeptical and they say, well, I'm just going to sit here like this, and as soon as it becomes really interesting, then I might jump on it, but certainly not going to take a risk. I think it's interesting to observe that if these new media, in this case, emerge, when we see that people in the industry, people that we know very well, are embarking on these kind of new media, actually are creating interesting stuff. You and Nowness and other people being part of that. I think it's interesting to observe that we are very skeptical and critical, and we should be able to dare a little bit more and say, well, why don't we just try and make something out of it ourselves?
I'm realizing, we mentioned in the report that we don't talk about transmedia specifically, because one thing that's very clear is that all the stuff that works about transmedia is becoming just common practice, and that is how you reach out to audiences. So now it's just filmmaking, but now it becomes integrated. A lot of those experiments have become integrated into filmmaking and sales and marketing as well. But VR is very different, as you say, because its own forms are emerging. But I see now that you have taken out some papers.
I brought this for you because I think you will like it. It's a report that was published yesterday or the day before by the Canada Media Fund, which is doing a very strong analysis of data. They work for television, but some of the information is also interesting for the film people. According to their numbers, in 2020, virtual reality will be bringing back revenues of $30 billion, US dollars, and augmented reality they're talking about $120 billion. Of course, it's video games industry, but there are more and more studios like Oculus Story Studios who are working with filmmakers, and I think it's going to come fast in the cinema world, because some filmmakers. I just came across a young producer from Luxembourg who is working on a feature-length VR movie with a well-known director, with well-known actors. It's going to take a few years before it's done, but they're seriously working on it with some funding. And there's a lot of money invested by big players, so they will want to have content for these apps. You're going to be able to download on your Samsung and watch from home.
I do get a little worried about the cinemas because this is a home entertainment platform. Essentially, you're going to want to be in a safe environment when you disappear into this. Maybe there are going to be VR cinemas as well, something like that. But for now, it's something you do in the home. And if you have those powerful, big experiences in the home, that actually may compete with the powerful, big experiences in the movie theater. Could we talk a little bit about the movie theater? We paint up this image of a renaissance of independent cinema, and saying that the new distribution possibilities in combination with all of these exciting things happening with the independent exhibitors is going to create a vibrant market for things that would be considered perhaps more niche. Do you agree? And also, do you see any positive signs? Because now all of us have to go out and actually try and invent all of those new business models that create this vibrant marketplace. Where do we begin?
I mean, I definitely seen you used a slide of an image from the Alamo Drafthouse. I've worked with them on several films, and I think that the model there is a really interesting one, because they're exploiting a brilliant kind of exhibition model in terms of a very, very strong brand around its cinemas, a very, very strong kind of cult ethos. Where they are doing quote-along girls' night movies and very, very silly things and big Star Wars festivals like they do. But at the same time, they're buying the look of silence for the US, and they're promoting that and pushing it out and making crazily brilliant cult movies like The Greasy Strangler and reinvigorating Wake in Fright as a film, an Australian lost 1970s classic. So I think there's a really interesting sort of for me, they're a great exhibitor-distributor model of that push and pull that you were talking about earlier, about building a relationship and a trust with an audience because they're delivering some big-scale, quite pulpy experiences in the best possible way, and then saying, now go with us, come and see this will move you, this is the documentary you need to see this year, and this is how it works. And they get the audiences to go. The chain of cinemas is expanding rapidly. There's kind of another 5 or 10 sites on the way. So it's a really interesting model that is purely centred on a very simple thing, and it's passion for film. And it's exploring different voices, and it's really, really beating a really vibrant drum, I think.
Well, last year we did one of the roundtable with 3 exhibitors. There was Tim League, okay. There was a Watershed also in the UK, and from Czech Republic also Kino Aero. And these 3 exhibitors in totally different market, like UK, which is really competitive market, the US and Texas, so it's not where you will have big audiences for world cinema or classic movies. And Czech Republic, which is a small eastern country, Europe. So different audiences, different. They all found ways of bringing, becoming kind of community center where they really attract local audiences, but around sometimes difficult films, being very creative, very. And if there's a video on the website that I encourage you to go see, because Tim League, for example, he explains his business model. He's a maniac about data. He's totally crazy about. He knows everything about each of the spectator coming to his theater, and he pushes really his team to understand. Who is their audience, and to program his theaters also according, and it's quite interesting because he has really his own business model, which is different from this Czech exhibitor, who is working more locally, but having great success with the.
I should say that we do have the possibility to take audience questions. This is a microphone, believe it or not, but I can't necessarily see the audience. So could we raise the house lights a little bit, perhaps? Does anybody have a question right now? No? I don't think so. If you do, holler. I'll try and keep an eye out also. What about, I mean, the sales agents and distributors are saying right now it's very difficult even to sell independent film because those paths don't exist. Is that getting better? I'm looking at you, Justine.
You know, there's 2 perspectives. In terms of, you know, me living in the UK, what I'd say is that it's certainly not the death of cinema. I think there's still an appointment to view. You do want to go to see a film in a cinema because it's on the big screen. I think there was a comment earlier on in terms of, you know, there's about local communities. A lot of cinemas now have cafes and restaurants, and they do much more than that. They have other classes as well. In terms of my role with Iroko, in terms of being, obviously, specialist in Nollywood, cinemas just don't exist in Nigeria and across Africa. I mean, they do exist, but in small numbers. In fact, you can probably, count them on your hand. So films there are released predominantly, obviously either straight on DVD, which are then pirated very quickly, or what we do is we release straight on our app and our website, and that tends to be now the distribution mechanism for films and TV series.
Matthias, what are you thinking?
Well, I think it's very interesting to realize what you just said, Justine. If we think about, you said before, cinemas might be threatened and it might be parallel experience, which might be put, like the experience of seeing content in a cinema in danger. Yes, that will happen, and it's happening already, and I think everybody notices that. The question is if we're going to feel threatened by that or maybe seize the opportunity to build something parallel to the cinema experience that actually people are enjoying the content that we're producing and trying to sell. And I think if we do that and create something, and I think looking at Africa and how things are developing there for specifically that reason, just to be inspired by what happens if there are no cinemas, where do people watch things, and at some point I'm sure people watch content there, but it might also be, and already existing, I don't know, you know that better probably, people who feel that some content actually they want to watch it somewhere else. So what will happen then? Will they still, I mean, I'm sure that also in Africa there's lots of people who realize that their phone is fantastic, but actually some of the content deserves a bigger screen, which doesn't have necessarily to lead to a typical cinema situation as we know it. I'm just a bit like thinking loud here. I think, to conclude with that, I think it's interesting to look at those kind of examples, but I think also it's important to get ourselves a little bit out of the bubble and the vicious circle of the existing system as we created it is not what the audience want anymore. And I'm coming back to what Anna said before. We shouldn't try to give answers that are industry answers, but basically maybe let the industry be a little bit for 1 hour, for 1 day, for a few days, and think with other people who have found solutions actually from very different industries. I'm talking about telecommunications. The car industry is moving very fast, and in 2 to 3, 5 years we'll be driving in very different cars. But also the games industry was mentioned already quite some times. I think we should get those people more actively and invite them to brainstorm with us, because they've actually made those paradigm shifts already in the past 15 years.
It is a little bit taboo. I mean, it is a little bit taboo in this context, especially, I mean, for all of us who are working with cinemas or working with film markets and the distributors, when your customers indeed are distributors and producers who are focused on cinema. I think to sit here and say, maybe we need to look at things that are outside theaters. So maybe we are also we're backing away because we're worried that the exhibitors are going to get sad.
Maybe, but I think it's not realistic to create a Luna Park for people every year, a few times in a year in a nice city like Berlin or in Cannes, and say like, well, go buy a ticket and play around. But actually we know it's not a realistic world, and people will be ending up in the real world after a few days of attending a film market. I think film market should be more than a Luna Park. I mean, they should reflect and also help people answer questions and also challenge them a little bit.
Justine and then Julie.
I mean, you know, my view, I mean, what we're trying to do at Oroka is obviously sort of future-proof. I've mentioned this before. Cinemas just don't really exist in terms of our distribution at all. It's really interesting. So, you know, your comment in terms of people might want to watch films in a different way. They don't want to just sit there with their mobile phones. Actually, what we're finding is that's exactly what they want to be doing. And in fact, the number of phones and smartphones across Africa, I mean, the increase is absolutely incredible. And so we're trying to track that. What we're also finding is that TV and trying to get, you know, a pay TV service in Africa is very expensive. So people would rather just, you know, obviously pay for data on the phone. So I think it's a very different model in Africa versus what you guys are dealing with, which is across Europe. I think, you know, you have very different markets.
At the same time, though, when we're looking at when Swedish audiences, for instance, are polled about their behaviors and preferences, I mean, if you want to see a movie in your home today, the majority, I think over 90%, will do it on a television type screen. But they also, when you ask them, what are you going to be seeing movies on in 5 years? Many people, I think 20-30%, say probably on a tablet. So already we're making this shift. I think it's also depending on what we have right now and the kinds of expectations. So maybe even here it's shifting away from the big screen towards the smaller ones. Julie?
Well, that's why I am a big defender of education to cinema. I think it's one of the very important topic. It's mentioned a little bit in the report, but I think education is key, and because if we want in even 5 years our kids to enjoy the cinema experience, we have to bring them there. It has to be in the schools. It has to be because there's not only the DS we call the PlayStations. There's other ways of experiencing images, and so I think that's really key, and it needs to be defended. It needs to be subsidized probably and financed, but it's really key. Or I run across statistics that if you don't go to museum or the way you experience culture when you're a young kid under 10, it's the way you're going to experience culture for the rest of your life. That's how you experience it. So, and it will not change if you have not been taught.
We're going to be rounding up pretty soon, so very briefly, Matthijs. And also now, if you want to ask a question, it's your last shot.
I do agree with Julie, but I would like very strongly to plead for not just learning young people to enjoy content as we have been learned to enjoy content. I'm very much against that. I think if I look at my nieces and nephews who are like 1, 2, or 3 and something like that, I don't see them that often, but they're like something like that, and how they basically at the age of 1 or 2 are able to look and find content on the phones of their mother. I mean, why? Yes, of course. I mean, I'd love them to show why I like to go to a cinema and take them to the cinema and show, like, I don't know, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when it's still in the cinema. But I also think education is important, but I think also we should educate ourselves and re-educate ourselves when we see how a new generation, or not even a generation, I mean, I'm not sure if you're a generation, if you're 1 or 2, is actually consuming and behaving with content and taking it and enjoying it as well. I'm not saying it's per se good and that the old system won't work anymore in 10 years because everybody will do a different thing. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm quite wary of defending something that has been when it's clearly moving into a direction where we shouldn't be afraid of, and just see how we can make it our movement and be part of that movement.
I'm being reminded that we do actually have to wrap up now, so that means final words for each of the ladies. Justine, you can do a strong recommendation for the future if you have one, because I think Matthijs was, let's not be afraid. Yes.
My strong recommendation is get your content on mobile. So whether it's basically mobile apps. So we're obviously looking for on Android is big in Africa, but then you can produce apps for obviously other types of platforms. But I think that should be the focus.
Anna.
For me, it's a kind of it's a symbiotic relationship between diversity and accessibility. I think, but as Matthijs says, that the iPads have revolutionised the world because a 1-year-old can use it as well as my 90-year-old aunt. And there's something accessible about that. And I think cinema will continue to thrive and grow along with education, but actually also with a sense of representation, so that people will go to a communal experience where they feel they are part of that community. And the work of Watershed and stuff that's been mentioned is a great example of that, that young people, people of certain minorities, a whole range of folks will come together for huge communal experiences, but they will also come for more specialist content if they feel welcome, if they feel that, like, they have access to that world because the storytellers are from their world or talking about their world.
And Julie, finally.
Well, I like what Matthijs, you said about thinking outside of the box. Also, I think the film industry should look at what's being done also in other area, and maybe talk with architects about the cinema of the futures, and talk about different so that we can reinvent and these business models.
Very good. I would like to extend an enormous thanks to all of the experts who have participated in the work with the report, some of which are here in the panel today, and of course to our wonderful panelists, Justine Powell, Julie Bergeron, Matthijs Wouternol, and Anna Higgs. And just a final word, these are of course our supporters. We expect to be back next year. Go in on nostradamusproject.org where you will find the report. Of course, you will also get a physical copy right here, but spread it around. And then come and argue with us on the internet. We like that a lot, especially if you argue with footnotes, because we love the references and you can find them all on our site. Thank you. See you next year.